And thank you for staying with us here on PM Express. My name is Evans Mensah, and it is a big conversation about what is a government proposal. Is it even a proposal? Government has been clear that they would like to wean public tertiary institutions of the government payroll as part of measures to deal with the economic crisis. And as you can imagine, UTAG's recent strike action has possibly led to this, as we call, the unintended consequence, because what UTAG is asking for, more than $2,000, is something that obviously is going to carry a lot of burden for the economy. And, you know, wage bill is a huge problem for this country. And government is thinking about ways of doing this. And the implications could be very, very severe. We're going to be looking at that tonight here on PM Express. If you are one of those who is a keen watcher of the tertiary institution and education generally, this is a conversation that you definitely want to pay attention to. So what exactly is government intention is? And the finance minister gave us a clear view of this when he declared last week that in the medium term, and so this is not something that he plans to do in the long term, in the medium term, government wants to wean off public tertiary institutions from government payroll and provide them with fixed amount block grant instead. And so this is interesting. Why? So the weaning of the public tertiary institutions from what? Government payroll. And so what it means is that the government, the institutions themselves, University of Ghana, KNUST, they would have to pay their own lecturers. That is very key, and run the institutions themselves. But government says you do that with only a grant from government. And then, of course, if you look at the institutions in question, we have some 13 subvented agencies that, if you go back, and this is important because this is not the first time a government in facing an economic crisis has attempted to do something similar. Because in 2014, remember that time the country was also in the firm grips of an economic crisis. The Secretary Finance Ministry also proposed, this is part of the homegrown measures. We were trying to convince the world and the investor community that we could fix the economic crisis at that time. One of the proposals that came up was to wean some public agencies off the government payroll. One of them was the Driver and Vehicle License Authority, DVLA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Energy Commission, Data Protection Commission, Gaming Commission, Securities and Exchange Commission, and others. They were all proposed. So the point about this is, the last time we had a similar economic crisis, there was a suggestion that deal with the payroll challenges and take off some public agencies. The question really is, to what extent have we done this since 2014, 2015, after we went to the IMF? And the key thing to note also is that although we proposed this, it did not eventually prevent us from going to the IMF. The question comes down to implementation. And we'll be talking about that tonight when it comes to the suggestion now in 2022, again with the economy in another crisis, another government is proposing taking a huge part of the burden of the payroll, which is the public tertiary institution. And so you could see there that this is not the first time this has been floated as a solution to an economic crisis. And the IMF likes this, right? The IMF likes this because the IMF has always in the past, when we've gone to them, one of the first places they focus is the government payroll. Why? Because if you look at the items, and I'll come to that very shortly, if you look at the items that form the bulk of what we use our revenue on, compensation is one of those biggest items. It's always been, with the exception of this year where payment of loans has taken over. The interest payments have taken over this particular item on the budget. So this is very significant, and it's the reason why each time you want to cut something from the budget, the IMF focuses on payroll, right? Because we're talking about 35.8 billion this year alone, just to pay compensation. So payroll is key, and the governments have tried it before in 2014. The point is, this really didn't work then. But this is a one-line item, public tertiary institutions, and so maybe this Might work, we don't know. Because there are what? 14 public universities and 10 technical universities. What will happen is that all of them will go off government payroll and will simply get a grant to operate. They have to, operate like everybody else. All the private institutions, all the private universities and tertiary institutions, they survive by themselves. How? By charging fees of those who enroll. But can a public tertiary institution rely heavily on fees alone? That will lead to a hike, some have suggested, in fees, and that public interest aspect of your role in society may be hampered, because poor families like mine will struggle to raise funds to take their kids to the public tertiary institution if this happens. That is a downside to the argument, and we'll look at the positives, because obviously it's going to be key. Now, for these institutions that I've touched on, the 14 and the 10, this is the 2022 budget. We just went to do a bit more mining in the 2022 budget. If you look at it, government is this year projecting to spend 5.65 billion cedis on the public tertiary institution, tertiary education in Ghana. 5.65 billion. The e-levy, that there's a huge fight has been about, is 6 billion. So what it means is that the tertiary education alone is going to take the entire e-levy off this year alone. And if you look at the breakdown, university education is costing us 3.9 billion. That's a huge figure. That's a huge figure. Colleges of education, 594 million cedis. You look at this polytechnic education, 717 million. You look at specialized teaching institutions, 100 million. You look at science, research, publications, 14 million. You look at supervisory boards, 297 million. These are the numbers that is convincing government that we should do something about this. 5.65 billion. Government says if we can wean you off the payroll, a huge part of this figure will be saved. The economic crisis will virtually be over. Because if you compare this, if the e-levy is a savior, e-levy is giving you 6 billion, if you take a huge part of this off and you give them the grant of even half of this that is going to universities alone, that's huge. You already left 3.5 billion, that you are saving. That is the rationale behind the finance minister's proposal last week, that government is going to do this. Now again, if we look at the university education key expenditure items, so what is it that the universities and the tertiary education, what is it particularly that they use the monies on? Again, the budget tells us, right? Compensation of employees alone at the tertiary level. This is the university, right? This is university education. Not all of it, not the College of Education, not politics, just university. Compensation for lecturer, UTAG members, and others, right? 1.9 billion. That's a lot of money that the government says, this is payroll, so I want to take this off my payroll. I want to take this off my budget. I don't want to be paying this. You should be paying it yourself. That's what government is saying, by the way. Goods and services, 1.2 billion. That's a lot of money. Then you have others, like social benefits, other expenses, and non-financial assets as 6.54. So now you begin to appreciate how much savings government will make in an economy in crisis if they're able to take this 1.9 billion off their books. Okay, and then you begin to see so if assuming government goes ahead with this, can the university survive? Then we've got to look at the internally generated funds. Can the universities themselves survive by themselves, just by without government funding them all the way, with government grants supporting them? If you look at KNUST, for this year, it is projected that they will raise 381 million cedis, right? That's what they are planning to raise here, and that begins to tell you that it's pretty small, right? Not 385,000. That's pretty small. Not a million, by the way. That's just 385,000 cedis. That's tiny. If you bring the government grant in, would that be enough to balance the equation and get them to run That's a big question that we need to ask ourselves. And if you look at the University of Ghana, 355,000, that's really small. And this is the internal generated funds of the university 2022 projected, right, in the budget. Some selected universities in the budget, right? Then you look at, for example, UMAT, 24,000. That's very, very small. And UHAS, by the way, and the Vice Chancellor is joining us in the budget, is 34,000. He would try and give me a clarity on this number very shortly. But this is pretty small there. I mean, so can they survive without it? We'll look at that very shortly. And then, but there is a flip side to this question, right? So if these numbers mean that the universities can't survive without government, bankrolling them, can the universities themselves save some money? Can they do better here? If you look at the Auditor General report, it gives us a sense of the wastage at some of the tertiary institutions. And this particularly is reporting on 13.1 million cedis that cannot be, it's part of irregularities. It means that part of this is money that the universities should have saved. 2019, 170 million cedis. That the technical universities, irregularities there alone amounting to this amount. So that tells you that there's a lot of wastage in the system there that can also, become part of the internally generated funds. But there's a big question there, right? Would this lead to hiking fees? But why can't they also survive? If the private universities are doing it, why can't the public universities do it? Right? Big conversation here on PM Express after this break. And thank you for staying with us here on PM Express. And my guest joining me tonight, Professor John Owusu Japan. He's a friend of the PM Express indeed, and I'm happy that he's joining us for a conversation. He's a Vice Chancellor of the University of Health and Allied Sciences, and so he runs a public university. I'm looking forward to his thoughts on this. Dr. Samuel Nkumban, he's a UTAC President, University of Ghana Chapter. I've heard some say that this particular decision of the finance ministry or government may be an unintended consequence of their recent agitation for better working conditions. I'll pick his thought very shortly. Kofi Asare is Executive Director of the Africa Education Watch, and he has also been studying tertiary education financing in Ghana, and I'm happy that he could join us. And very quickly, just to clarify, correct a bit of the data I posted earlier at the beginning. When I was talking about the internally generated funds, I talked about it in thousands. It's actually in millions. So you're talking about, if you look at the finance ministry, they project that KNUST will raise 381 million, not 381 million cedis this year just from internally generated funds. And of course, UHAS, and I have Prof with me, has been projected to raise 32 million cedis this year. That's 32, to be precise, 32 million 783,000 cedis this year alone. Prof, let me start with you, Professor Japan. You run a public tertiary institution. First of all, what do you make of the announcement last week by the finance minister that your institution and others will be weaned off the public sector payroll and given a grant instead? Is it a good strategy for your institution?
Good evening, Evans, and thanks for having me. I must say that this announcement to some of us did not come as a surprise, because during the recent negotiations during the UTAC strike, the subject was broached. So clearly, there is some intention there, but it hasn't been expressed fully. So we do not know what the details are. It is not my expectation that winning as of means that we get nothing. I interpret it to mean that government would give us what it is supposed to give us in the bulk grant to be able to manage the universities, as is done in many other jurisdictions. So this is not the first time. And indeed, as you indicated, this whole concept of weaning off institutions of government payroll is not new.
Yeah.
You alluded to the 2014 intentions.
Yeah.
Even at that time, well, I happened to be the Pro-Vice Chancellor at the University of Ghana at that time for research, innovation, and development. The subject was broached again.
Oh,
and at that time, the focus was supposed to be on the three big universities. That was University of Ghana, KNUST, and UCC. But, well, as you know, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
As to why it didn't happen, I believe we can all interrogate it for us to be able to learn going forward. But I also need to state a point that the 32 million that you posted for UHAS is the total revenue.
Okay.
So sometimes when you talk of IGF, it's as if the IGF is separate from something else. The 32 million is the total revenue, apart from government salaries that it pays. And of that 32 million, you did not present the expenditure component, because the budget that you are looking at has a very clear expenditure component. There are some that they just go in and out. For instance, students' accommodation. We do not have, when government built UHAS, it didn't provide student accommodation like you have in Legon, where you have Legon Hall, Commonwealth Hall, and the like. We do not have that. So we are into partnership with private hostels. But to facilitate the students getting accommodation, we get into these partnerships and basically collect the rent for the students. And all that is captured in that 32 million that you put out there. So it's not that university management has some 32 million to spend to decide on what it has to use it for. Almost every penny there is targeted. So it is not that there is some, floating money that can be used for anything at all. So I thought I needed to put that in right perspective. So the whole concept of block grants is not new. Indeed, if you would permit me,
yes,
I have some 4 slides that I would like to share with you.
I would like to look at that. Yes.
Sure. Okay. So, well, I have not been. It says the host has disabled my screen sharing.
So pull it up, and then I'll come back to you, and then we can share that very shortly. In the meantime, I want to go to Dr. Samuel Nkumbam. Doc, thank you for connecting with us here on PM Express. Now, the start of this conversation, Professor Japona just indicated, and I was just conjecturing, but apparently it actually happened, that in your negotiations with government actually broached the subject that this is going to come. This is a consequence of your push for better conditions of service, is it not?
No, actually, Evans, to be fair,
okay,
this suggestion came from the UTAC side.
Oh, okay, so the UTAC suggested.
This suggestion came from the UTAC side.
Oh, so UTAC.
Yes, okay. This suggestion came from the UTAC side. That a better management system is giving the university the grants that it requires to be able to run the university. So I guess in the expectation of UTAG, if, for instance, government is giving UHAS say 5 million CDs for salaries every month, then over the year it will be about 60 million. So government will give the university the 60 million and say, you manage it and don't come to me. I conjecture that that was the expectation. So it is not to say that government was going to take away all the funds that it gives to the universities. Of course, in that discussion, it became clear that it wasn't going to be the total 100% that would come to the university. But as to what proportion of it would come, nobody discussed that. I mean, the subject was broached. It wasn't discussed in detail. So nobody had...
I'd give it, thankfully, the president of UTAC chapter at the University of Ghana is with me. Let me bring him in so he can expand on this for me. Dr. Samuel Nkumbam, again, so expand for me on this. What was the basis of this suggestion from UTAC then to the government?
Thank you very much. And, let me salute my colleagues on the panel. Prof, good evening. And my colleague on the other side of the Education Watch. We've had a couple of engagements, and good evening to you as well. Reality is that UTAC has made a couple of propositions to government, not now. In fact, the establishment of a national research fund was proposed by UTAC as far back as 2009. And so for us to be thinking about implementing a national research fund in 2022 is something that would beat anybody's imagination if UTAC, which is at the forefront of teaching, learning, and research, suggested in 2009 that we needed a national research fund that could possibly engage issues of national development, and that government needed to consider establishing a national research fund. And in 2022, we are engaging that. Then, of course, you can appreciate the kind of national thinking around tertiary education that we have going forward. Reality is this, that the proposition for the establishment or for winning of universities from government subvention is not something that is new, as my senior man has indicated. It's been in the news. The lack of political will to do it has been one of the reasons for where we find ourselves. Reality is that I cannot have an undergraduate University of Ghana student paying less than 2,000 Ghana cedis as annual academic facility user fees. And then I have a brother who has to be in a nursing college, which is a public institution, doing a certificate program that he pays over 3,000 cedis.
What's the basis for that?
Similarly,
disparity?
I cannot have a private hostel.
I mean, what's the basis for that
They are
disparity?
both public institutions. That is for government to answer, not for me to answer, in fact. And so I was going to go to the point of about residential facility user fees, that you have fees for main halls of the universities that are less than 1,000 Ghana cedis per year, for which competition is keen, and there is a struggle, and in that matter, a fierce struggle for survival of the fittest within the system. Whereas private hostels will charge, say, 4,000 per bed for the academic year, and those hostels are oversubscribed. And so if in reality government wants to win the universities of the system, government has got to do the needful by doing all the necessary engagements in terms of what it is that is required to run or to graduate an undergraduate student per year, so that realistically we all agree that these are the fees that are realistic for the universities to be able to operate on their own. These are the fees that ought to be paid in terms of academic facility user fees, in terms of residential facility user fees.
So Dr. Nkumbam,
I'm not sure. Hold on, just a minute. Like, okay. What I want to bring across is for, of course, Prof is here and Prof is in management, and he'll probably be in the position to make the case for what I'm going to ask. If the case is that government is subsidizing tuition, the amount of money that is subsidy on tuition, does it come to the university? For what purpose? Those are the questions to ask. If government is subsidizing on residential facility, how much subsidy is it that government is doing? And does that come to the university for maintenance of the facilities in which our students are living? So those are the questions. If those monies don't come, and what government subvention is about has to do with just emoluments, then there is a question mark. So to win us off will mean that we have to recover the extra in maintenance of residential facilities, in maintenance of academic facilities, which are the user fees that government subsidizes.
Yeah, you said earlier something I want to clarify. What this will mean, and since you propose, what this will mean in essence is that students will have to pay, as you call it, realistic fees.
Exactly the point.
Okay.
And so if the universities are going to be off government subvention as it currently pertains, and in fact, which in my view is not what it is, because if you are subsidizing fees at a certain margin, that margin should go to the university for academic facility maintenance and so on and so forth. If you are subsidizing on residential facilities, that amount should go to the universities for the maintenance of the facilities in which students take residence. If that is not the case, then what is the essence? And of course, what the government subvention currently does is to provide us with emoluments, which is payment of salaries of workers within the university.
Do you acknowledge,
and I think that,
do you acknowledge that realistic fees will mean a hike in what students already pay?
It's obvious. I mean, there's no doubt about that. The reality is that, I mean, I cannot have a student living in a private hostel who pays 4,000 Ghana cedis a year as against a student living in a government subsidized facility that pays less than 1,000 cedis per year. And if those were the mathematics that have to be done and that the universities can run on their own, I can guarantee that the universities will be sustainable. But also cautious about the fact that majority of the Ghanaian populace is living below the poverty line. And so if all of these subsidies that had to come to the university will be strategically positioned in a matter that supports the needy, that if you have a student loan scheme, that, for example, school is resuming on the 10th of January, the expectation is that the loan has been released before then, and students can pay and be able to register, so that they don't get defaulted in terms of fee payment and they are not able to register and so on. So it's also about the functioning of the institutions that operate in relation to all of these that we need to transact in order to be able to roll this out.
Okay,
so for me, it is not just about the political pronouncement, but it is also about the necessary stakeholder engagement, the putting in place the right policies and their implementation, which would ultimately result in the kind of outcomes that we want in terms of ensuring that whichever way they will still remain public institutions, and the government of Ghana has to have interest in what transpires.
Okay, Prof,
so
I'll come
basically,
back.
Those will be my
Stay with me, Prof. I'll come back to you shortly for your slides because I'm really interested in that. Let me give a quick thought to Kofi Asai. Kofi, so that's the UTech proposition. I mean, and at the base of this, and for many parents who are watching this, there's this point that he just touched on, that yeah, this will mean simply students paying realistic. Realistic means pay more, and sometimes commercial rates. That is one of the, some may say, negative consequences of this. Is that the way education is, as I say, expensive, and so that shouldn't be a problem. What do you say to that?
Well, Thank you, Evans, co-panelist, and then audience. This is not new on the continent. We've seen it happen in several countries, and we know the ramifications. So there's nothing about conjecture. The end is certain. In 2015, when South Africa began increasing the cost of tertiary education, we all saw what the fees must fall campaign, what caused the fees must fall campaign, and we know the outcomes. I listened to Prof saying that, Prof was trying to be as diplomatic as possible by saying that it doesn't mean government is not going to give them their compensation budget. Government is going to give them their compensation budgets. Well, then the question is, if government is going to give you your entire compensation budget, then why is government winning it off itself off your compensation? Then the very essence, the very economic essence of government winning itself off your compensation budget, which is obviously to control expenditure on compensation and achieve fiscal discipline, is actually defeated. So it cannot be entirely factual that government will be giving them the entire compensation package. No. Government simply cannot afford to pay the full.
Okay, we're having some difficulties with Kofi, your connection there. Let's see if we can get you on a better connection. But in the meantime, let me get. I think it's better. Yes. Okay. So sorry, we still have a challenge. Prof Japon. So you've had arguments there. I mean, where do you stand on this? I mean, can the universities survive when off government payroll?
Yeah, Evans, I think when we talk about weaning, the whole concept of weaning doesn't mean starvation. When you wean a child off breast milk, you introduce other foods. So there must be feeding. Except that maybe it may not be breast milk. But I think my colleague Samuel has indicated clearly that this would lead to a hike in fees and charges. Because as we speak now, our current approved fees and charges, which come from, to get our fees approved, we have to present it to Parliament. The last approval that I recall was for 2016. And every time we send it, we have challenges. It never gets passed, to say the least. So we are still applying 2016, 2017 academic year fees in 2022. And of course, if you talk about the value of the CD and all that, it means that the value of the resource that is coming to the universities has basically dwindled. And it's a big struggle to run public universities in this day and era. So if weaning means taking away the breast milk, then the weaning mix must be introduced, which would invariably be in the form of the fees being not being capped as it is currently being done. And if you look at the example of the UK, I was going to show you those slides. The example of the UK.
I think you can. I think you can now. If it's there, let me see it, because it's good to make a reference to
Yes.
it, so we can appreciate what is it that.
So just briefly, this is the public document. It's in the. If you go to the House of Commons library, if you Google it, you can find it. It's about higher education funding in England. It was dated in November last year. And I just have some 4 slides that I want to show you. And as far as I'm concerned, it tells the complete story. This is, they have what they call the Funding Council, which provides money to the universities. So from 2010, 2011 academic year, you could see that a lot of money was coming in from the funding councils to facilitate teaching. But as a result of the various reforms, it's basically gone down to a very stable figure now, much about maybe about a quarter of what it used to be previously. But if you look at the research funds and other capital funding, it's remained basically the same. But if you go and look at the funding towards fees, the amount of fees that students are paying, that has gradually increased over the years. So as the funding from the funding council went down, the fees were hiked.
Went up.
You know, so this is what one should expect if we want to run the universities and not run them aground. But the interesting thing is that they project that over the next couple of years, what I didn't say was the fact that government did not leave the students in limbo. Mm-hmm. Government provides adequate grants for the students to be able to access tertiary education. So now every student who gets admitted into UK universities may get a grant of up to about £9,200.
Okay.
Which is provided by government. So the grant follows the student into the university of his choice. But this is facilitated by government. And it is projected that up to about the year 2040, this would increase the net debt of the UK government by about 12% of the national debt. So it is not something that you can just wish away. Somebody has to pay for it. It is never free, and somebody definitely has to pay for it.
In this case, Prof. Yes. In Ghana's case, just on that question, who should pay for it? Government or student?
Oh, but the issue with the UK system is that government provides the loan, but the student pays over a long period of time when he gets employed.
So in other words, in the UK, the student ultimately is carrying the bulk of the burden.
Yes, because the OECD believes that there should be cost sharing as far as the state and students are concerned.
Would you advocate for same here, that the students should be left to carry the bulk of the burden in the long run, over time?
Well, the concept is that if you get a good tertiary education, you are likely to find a good job and should be able to get to be able to pay over a period of time. So we are not talking about a loan that you pay over 3 or 4 years. These loans are paid over almost a lifetime.
Okay.
Yeah. So in that instance, then it doesn't become a very heavy burden on the student who is receiving the loan. But it also gives the space to government and the universities to be able to do what it is that they have to do. Because, you know, look, we shouldn't run away from the facts. Unfortunately, I think for the kind of education that we are giving some of our students these days, we are kind of just shortchanging them. You know, look, when I was in medical school, I go for a physiology laboratory practice. I mean, I had access to almost every reagent that I need to be able to do all the experiments and have a feel of what it is that I had to do. What happens now? At best, there is a demonstration to 100 students. So they don't get the experience and the practice that they require. You know, and this also affects the quality of our products. You know, as we speak now, our colleagues in the private medical schools, for instance, are charging an annual fee of around $12,500 plus. But the government universities who are offering the same service, and sometimes even better, are compelled to charge around 3,000 cedis as academic facility user fees. How can you deliver the service that is required? So
Okay.
something has to give.
But Prof,
And I think we need to address it.
Prof, I have two quick questions, and I'll bring in Kofi. If you can address it for me in bullet, I like it because you're a prof. I know you can do this. First of all, government says block grant. What
Yes.
should the block grant go to do? Is it to subsidize the students' fees, or to pay for the lecturers' pay? What should it? What would you propose? What should that do? That block grant.
Well, I think at the end of the day, when you are managing an institution like we do, you look at the complete basket. You know that you need 100 million to run. Government has given you a block grant of 20 million. So you have a difference of 80 million, which has to be raised from research grants and fees to be able to do what you have to do. So at the end of the day, you put everything in the pot and apply it as needed.
Okay.
So it is not that the grant that comes from government should just go and pay fees,
Okay.
and then should just pay salaries, and then the grant that the fees that you collect from students should be used to do A, B, and C.
Okay.
It is a holistic thing.
So I get the point. Your point
you
is
cannot
that
just do one and leave the other.
So
if you don't pay the lecturers,
so
you don't have an education.
Okay, so that
And if you do not offer your municipal services,
so your point, just to clarify, your point is that the block grant should simply come to you based on an understanding of what the entire budget for a year
my point is that,
and then you decide how to top it up and what you use it for. The block grant.
yes,
It shouldn't be. In other words, it shouldn't be tied to anything. Allow the institution.
yes, but beyond that,
the
there should
free
also
hand.
be some deliverables.
Okay.
So you do not just get a block grant and then you just apply it. Well, I mean, that is what I think. That's my personal opinion, but it could be earmarked for whatever reason. But what I'm saying is that when you give that block grant, there should also be some expected outcomes.
Okay.
For my institution, maybe you tell me that because of this grant that I'm giving you, I expect you to produce 100 doctors a year, 80 pharmacists a year, 200 public health physicians. Yeah, there should be some expected outputs that go with the grant.
And then the final question, and a quick one also, is if the public tertiary institutions are weaned off government payroll, will they survive without that government subvention, or will they die as it is now?
Look, it's what you people call the zero-sum numbers. You need 100 million to survive, and that is the essential bottom line. If you don't get it, something would have to give. So the onus rests upon the managers to be innovative in raising the shortfall through not only fees, but also through grants and other sources of income for the university.
Okay, great. Yeah. Kofi, I lost you earlier, and I understand you're back on the telephone line. Give me your input then that you were sharing with us on the consequences of this and the experience elsewhere.
Yeah, I was indicating that this policy is one that our investors have been mooting for. They've been chasing for a long time. And so, obviously, Prof and Doc will be happy, and then they will present it in a very, very beautiful way, because it is their vision of how investors should be managed here. I agree with them. Our investors have enormous compensation budget. Our investors, apart from having huge compensation budget, still need more money to pay lecturers well. They need to hire more lecturers to reduce class sizes. I know some lecturers that are handling about 1,000 people in a class, etc. So yes, they are informed by the desire for quality and the ingredients of quality. So I do not begrudge them in any way. I appreciate the context within which they are for. A university system that charges realistic fees. But I wanted to indicate that if government is going to give the entire compensation needs of universities to them, then it will defeat the very essence of winning them off. Because the essence of winning them off, the compensation, is basically to control expenditure, achieve some fiscal consolidation and fiscal discipline economically. So if government is going to end up giving them all they need for salaries and allowances, then the whole idea of winning them off the compensation budget of government is defeated. So that is not the case. There's going to be a cut, there's going to be a quota, and government gives to you. If you need more lecturers, you want to pay lecturers well, do what you have to do to get more money and pay them. That is the implication. And as I said, we are not discussing anything we are envisioning. This is not nothing envisioning. We've seen it in other countries and we know what it will end up. Second, while this makes sense economically, because government is going to achieve some fiscal consolidation, reducing expenditure on compensation, etc., the social cost is huge. One, the social cost presents a situation where there's going to be a battle between realistic fees versus equality of access to special education, as guaranteed in Article 38(2) of our Constitution. To what extent would charging of realistic fees constrict or prevent the attainment of the provisions in 38(2) in respect of equality of access to special education? Now, without increasing the percentage of fee-paying students, universities cannot run with block grants. And also, without increasing the school fees of regular students, they cannot survive under this agreement. You bear in mind that even over the past 10 years, the percentage of fee-paying students keeps increasing because universities are making money from fee-paying students. So, for example, when you go and do pharmacy in Legon, a regular student you are paying 3,200, fee-paying you are paying 7,500. They've just increased the cutoff just to raise more funds. You understand? So, if we proceed with this, we are going to see universities increasing the percentage of students doing fee-paying. You will qualify, yes, but then will you say, will you come or you won't come? Surely that's how you're going to do it, apart from increasing the fees of regular students. Now, how will this affect government itself? You see, high fees will negatively affect free senior high school in the sense that the free senior high school policy benefits, the benefit of spending 2.3 billion a year on free senior high school and 4.2 billion a year on our secondary education system is because of the social and economic return. Not just the full enrollment, but the return. What value are we adding to them? Now, you have a situation where you are enrolling about 400,000, 40,000 in graduating, and a lot of them are unable to access tertiary education because of the cost of tertiary education. The government has set for itself a target to increase gross tertiary enrollment from 18% in 2018 to 40% by 2030. All because free senior high schools should graduate some significant numbers into tertiary so that we can make more value, economically on the investment we are making in business. But we are in year 5, and as we speak, we have not crossed 20%, but we are below 20% processing 5 years after the target.
I see.
And so it tells you that there are serious cost inhibitions. Cost barriers to tertiary are huge. And any policy like this obviously will contradict. This is a clear case of policy contradiction. Yes, you are achieving fiscal discipline, but it's affecting the attainment of the gross tertiary enrollment target in the education strategy plan. And those who will talk about this, we can't have a discussion of this within the context of finance, because we all know that the student loan always arrives at the end of the academic year. And so it cannot be compared to the British one. It cannot be compared to any serious loan scheme in Ghana. I won't talk about the scholarship scheme because we know it's not opaque and it doesn't respond to the needs of needy students who need money at the beginning of the semester to honor their admission first and become students. So within the context of finance tertiary education, this policy will not just hurt, it will negate government's own plan to increase gross tertiary enrollment from 18% in 2018 to 40% by 2020, for which we are still struggling to even get to 20 after 5 years.
I see. I mean, Dr. Nkambon, how soon would you want to see this implemented? The finance minister says in the medium term. He didn't put a particular time frame to it. Do you want to implement it as soon as next academic year?
For me, it is not about how soon it happens, but it is how effectively we do engage, as I have indicated. That reality is that we've come to that point where we may have to have this conversation. But as to how soon it is done, I do not want it to be rushed like any other government and political pronouncements that have become albatrosses on our necks in relation to the fact that some of those are the reasons for which the economic crisis we find ourselves in are hinged. And so as soon as government is practically and willing to engage stakeholders and to ensure that the parameters are set right and that when it is rolled out, we are not going to have any deficits in terms of, say, the expectation is that government subvention to the institutions particularly, because if you win us off, what it means is that our expectation will be that whatever has to go to students to be able to offset their fees and to be able to register and to run as students of the university would be done. And if that is not the case, then it becomes a challenge. If you, in my earlier submission, I indicated clearly that it is not about when it happens, it's not about who benefits. It is about the engagements that ensure that indeed what we want is what we are getting.
It's about getting it right.
Yes.
I guess it's the point you're making.
It's about getting it right.
Yeah. I mean,
and so if government wants to do that within the next 3 months and the stakeholders are available to do so and to ensure that by the next academic year we are rolling this out, why not?
Okay.
I don't think management will have any problem with that. I don't think lecturers will have a problem with that. And I don't think students would have a problem with that because
as for the students, I'm not sure because, I mean, since we've all agreed that this will mean increase in fees, you can expect some pushback from there. I'm grateful, gentlemen. I'm grateful, Professor John Owusu Japan. I'm grateful, Dr. Samuel Nkumbam, for your time, and Kofi Asare also. This is a conversation I'll come back to tomorrow. The Black Stars are playing Nigeria, and we hope to win. Win or lose, well, win or win. We'll be here talking about it on PM Express. Enjoy the rest of your evening.